Well, good evening. This is Truth Seeker Atheist here, and it's been a month or so since I made my last video. I apologize for that. I haven't been feeling well. I had some surgery done on my back about a month ago, at the end of February, and unfortunately, I don't think it's working very well. But only time will tell. But I hadn't been feeling all that well, and the chronic pain has a way of wearing you out and just making it so that you don't feel up to anything, even things that you enjoy reading. Many things that I have about 5 books lined up that I'd like to read, but I just don't feel like it. But I didn't want to go too long without making a video. This one is really unplanned, but I got a notice today that I got a new subscriber, and this is something that I guess I haven't done, but is thank my subscribers, because I don't have 20,000 subscribers, or 30,000 or whatever. Maybe what it is that my videos are long, and I don't keep things down to 5-minute sound bites. I mean, we seem to be a world of sound bites. We elected a president on the basis of sound bites. We don't listen any longer. I mean, there are just certain things you can't describe in 5 minutes, but that's the way the world wants it, Twitter, one-liners, and that's how we live. Millions and millions of one-liners, and what do we really know? You don't get to know anything unless you really dig into a subject. And I don't know, maybe college has changed. I haven't a clue, but I knew that I put hours of study time in when I went into college, and it paid off. I mean, I did well. I didn't think of myself as a person with a lot of capability as I was growing up, mainly because of the way I was raised. I had a very narcissistic father and a schizophrenic mother, and when I say schizophrenic, I'm not kidding. She was really out there, and she certainly didn't do my brothers and me a real favor with her 1 foot in reality and 1 foot out, and who knows what universe she lived in. But mental illness is passed down, and my middle brother, who ended up committing suicide, he was diagnosed schizophrenic, formally diagnosed, and I became very interested in the topic, and I read that there's a gene for that. There's a genetic propensity, and I guess in a lot of ways there's a genetic propensity for a lot of things. For alcoholism, they're finding a genetic propensity for addiction. They're finding a genetic propensity for psychopathy, and there are all kinds of interesting and new things that are being discovered all the time, and it was not fun being raised the way I was raised, with the Bible student world being the center of our world. It's funny, I was listening to Telltale Atheist the other day, and I had some catching up to do because I didn't even feel like listening to videos, and I enjoy him. And he had mentioned that something about the Bible students, and he said that they are scarily similar to the Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, I grew up a Bible student. But what I was thinking about, this is a time of year that is regarded in a very solemn way by Bible students. And I assume Jehovah's Witnesses too, because this is memorial season. I understand that the Jehovah's Witnesses are celebrating Memorial on the 31st. The Bible students are celebrating it this Thursday on March 29th at 7 o'clock. There always seemed to be a short distance or small time difference between the Bible students and the Jehovah's Witnesses. I can't understand why there would be this difference in when the memorial would be celebrated. The Bible students went to great lengths to find out the exact Jewish date using the Jewish calendar, and I never paid much attention to it. When the full moons and new moons and the month of Nisan and all that all factored into when the memorial was celebrated. But what is funny, and the reason why I know that the memorial is being celebrated by Jehovah's Witnesses on the 31st, is that my daughter called me last night, and she lives in the same town as my wife and I. And she said, "Dad, you can't believe what we got." And she showed me over a video chat over our iPhones that she and her husband got an invite from the local Kingdom Hall to join in the memorial. Now, I don't know why they haven't an idea as to why they were honored with such a privilege to attend a Jehovah's Witness memorial. It seemed kind of arbitrary because they haven't had any interactions with any Jehovah's Witnesses in maybe ever. I don't know. they would tell me if they had, and I don't recall them ever mentioning anything about having been approached by a Jehovah's Witness. And they're mostly not home anyway, so there's never time for them to be at the door, to especially on weekends. My daughter's a musician. She's a school teacher, and she's very active on weekends. Her husband works for a Harley dealership, and he works on weekends. That's their big time. So they're never home on weekends. In fact, often my wife and I are babysitting our grandson for them on weekends. So we really get a great chance to be with our little, almost 3-year-old grandson now. But I was thinking about the memorial, and growing up as a kid, we usually celebrated the memorial. You see, we use the same terms as the Jehovah's Witnesses, celebrating the memorial and serving the emblems, but I think the Bible students kind of kept to the original tradition as it was done in the day of Charles Taze Russell, because the Bible students all believe that they are running for the prize of the high calling, and that, in other words, they believe that they're part of the anointed. That's how current Jehovah's Witnesses would call it today, would be the being one of the anointed. Well, all of the Bible students are baptized into Christ and into consecrated condition to be part of the 144,000. And that was what the original baptism was. No Bible student was ever baptized to be a servant to the Watchtower Society with an earthly hope until after Joseph Rutherford came up with the Jonadab class and started the Jehovah's Witnesses in the 1930s. Up until that point in time, anybody who was baptized into the anointed class. And that's why when you look at memorial figures that predated 1932, that included, those numbers would include those that were partaking of the emblems, and the majority would be partaking of the emblems, the crackers and the unleavened bread and the grape juice or wine. Some of the real hardliners like to use wine, but the way I remember it is that because it always tended to coincide, or frequently, the memorial frequently coincided with the Easter school. When I was in school, was predominantly Christian, and they would close for Easter vacation for 2 weeks. Now that's something you don't hear of today. They have a winter break and a spring break, and schools don't close down for religious holidays like they did when I was in school. And so we would be off from school for 2 weeks at Easter. Now, I think the only time schools are closed for that length of time for a holiday is around Christmas season, New Year's. But maybe I'm wrong. It's been a long time since I had a child in school. But my parents would take the time to go down to Florida because that's where my father was raised. When he was 12 years old, they moved from Roseburg, Oregon, where he had been born in the 1920s, and then my grandfather moved back. Grandfather and his family moved back to Florida, and they ended up in Orlando back in the 1930s. Shortly after they left the Watchtower Society, I had made a previous video on when I discovered they had left the Watchtower Society, and frankly, I was quite surprised that my family had ever called themselves Jehovah's Witnesses, but it's not something that any Bible student would ever admit to, though many were Jehovah's Witnesses. Most would never had admitted to had ever been in association with Rutherford and with the witnesses during the 1930s, but quite a few did. Quite a few Bible students were before they came out in the late 30s. There really was Rutherford called it a sifting period during the 1920s and 30s, really since he had taken over, but there were a lot of Bible students. By the end of the 1920s, the exodus from the Watchtower Society was really growing and really gaining momentum. And many Bible students were already gone. I think an estimated 75% of the original Bible students during Charles Russell's time, about the time he died, were gone by the late 1920s. But there were still many that were hoping that the Watchtower would be corrected by Jehovah, but they lost hope by the end of the 1930s, and the stragglers left the Watchtower and joined the Bible Students movement, which was beginning to coalesce by the end of the 1930s, again, independent of the Watchtower. And there were several groups in that period of independent Bible students. There were the Layman's Home Missionary, and there were the Standfasters, which was a Pacific Northwest group. They didn't believe in witnessing, so they died out relatively quickly. Then there was the Dawn Bible Students, and they're still in existence today, although greatly diminished in size. And that was the branch of the Bible Students that my family was associated with. I had already probably mentioned that 100 times. But we would often go to Florida and celebrate the memorial at that point, or because it was about the Easter vacation and it overlapped, and so I remember being at my grandfather's home. They had a nice little home in Winter Park, just outside of Orlando. Back in the days when Orlando area was still largely orange groves. And my daughter just texted me about the movie The Room. We watched. I needed some of my spirits picking up a little bit. She said, "Well, go watch the what was that? The disaster. I can't remember it now. You see how old I'm getting. But it was a It was the movie about the guy that made The Room, and I got it. Now I have to. I tell you, I'm terrible. I have to. I have to find this now. They don't know where the guy's from and how he funded it, but the Room. It's not like a cult classic. I don't keep up on these things, but yeah, Tommy Wiseau, and it was a movie that I guess it's regarded one of the worst movies ever made, and there was a farce that was made. The Disaster Artist. That's it. The Disaster Artist. That was made by James Franco and his younger brother. That documented this movie, The Room. So you can see the kind of dark humor that we kind of like in this family. We're we're a little crazy, but anyway, I remember my grandma, and this was back in the early to middle '60s, 1960s, and she would go out. Because the Orlando Ecclesia, Bible Students Ecclesia, it was started by my grandparents in the 1930s when they moved there, and they still held the meetings in their home. So she would set up the house for the meeting and for the memorial. And a day or so before the memorial, she would buy all the grape juice. Now, my grandparents were absolute teetotalers. They were totally against alcohol, 100%, completely, totally against alcohol. And I don't know, that's a tradition. I don't know why it was in my family, but it was in my entire family that alcohol was really looked down on as a bad vice. I mean, a really bad vice. But she would get grape juice, and she would buy, I don't know, 5 or 6 half-gallon bottles of grape juice, and then she'd get several boxes of matzahs, and she had a table that she'd set out, and she'd put this white linen tablecloth out onto the table at the front of the rows of chairs where the brethren would sit, and it was a special tablecloth that was only used one time a year. The memorial was really a solemn occasion, a very sanctified occasion by the Bible students. It was they treated it in a very serious way, very serious. There was no joking around with the memorial. And she had all of these little shot glasses that she had bought, little tiny ones. And I'm not sure they were actually shot glasses, but they were small, very small glasses. And she would fill a tray. Now, at the time, there were probably about 35 or 40 Bible students in Orlando at the time, and that's how many chairs she would set up. And us kids, we would sit in the back because we weren't going to be partaking of the emblems. And she broke up the matzah and laid it out on special trays that she used for the memorial. And she put the little glasses on these trays for serving, and she had all of this prepared in advance, and she made it very clear that the grape juice was sanctified, that this grape juice was not for general consumption. And so, for some reason, I guess maybe in her mind, this was holy grapes or something. I don't know, but she wanted to make it clear that to us boys that we were not supposed to drink any of that grape juice before the memorial. That was set aside strictly for the memorial. And memorial was one of those things meetings that at least didn't last long, and that's why I liked it, because there was no fellowship, there was no talking. It was very strange. If you were a stranger and walked into the memorial, a Bible student's memorial, you would find it very odd. If they're still celebrating it the way they did when I was growing up, the memorial would always start at 7:00, no matter what night of the week it was. It wasn't reserved for a Sunday or Saturday. They held it on the night of the actual date that was calculated. There was somebody that would calculate the date and then pass the news to the Dawn. The Dawn would publish it, and everybody, all the Bible student classes, would celebrate memorial on that day. And by about 6:45, the brethren would start filtering into the front door, and nobody talked. It wasn't a time for fellowship. Sometimes even in Florida in March, it can be a little cool, especially in the evenings, and sometimes, especially Floridians, people who aren't used to 50-degree weather, they put coats on, overcoats, and so they would take off their overcoat and they would lay it down somewhere where my grandmother pre-designated, I guess, on a chair in the living room or something, and they would go find their seat, and everybody was all dressed up as if it was a Sunday meeting, white shirts, ties. We boys had little bow ties and jackets and white shirts, and we were all spiffed up for the meeting. And when 7:00 came, they would open up with a prayer and hymn as usual. An elder was designated to give a talk about the memorial and about the significance of the memorial and the meaning of Jesus' death, and about the ransom, and how the ransom was the cornerstone of the truth, and that without his sacrifice there wouldn't be any hope for the high calling, and to be part of the 144,000. And so there would be the talk, and then you knew you were getting close to the end of the talk when they got to the part where they started reading from Matthew, the account where Jesus is inaugurating the memorial supper. And they would, the elder would then read, and Jesus broke bread and said, "Take, eat, This is my body, which I give for the world. And and so the deacons would get up. It was all choreographed. Everything was, everybody knew their job. They knew exactly what they were going to do and when they were going to do it. And they get the trays with the matzahs, and then they'd pass a tray down one row, and there was a deacon on one side of the row and a deacon on the other side. Deacons are ministerial servants for Jehovah's Witnesses. But we called them deacons. We had elders and deacons, and used the King James terminology. And one tray would be going down one row in one direction, another tray would be going down a row in the other direction, and the deacons would pick up the trays and then move down to the next two aisles, and so on until everybody got a piece of matzah. And then there were the deacons couldn't just pick the matzah off themselves. The elder served the deacons, and then the deacon would serve the elder. Nobody could serve themselves. I don't know why. It just was the way it was. And they'd leave maybe 5 minutes of time, and you'd hear people nibbling and on the hard crackers, and you hear them snap, and people would be chewing and praying with their eyes closed and their heads bowed in some sanctimonious look. And as kids, it just felt awkward because, first off, we weren't taking anything, and then second, we're, observing all this kind of strangeness going on. and then the elder would get up after he figured that there was enough time for people to finish contemplating their consecration vows. Then he would say, and then Jesus took the cup, and he passed the cup and said, "Take, drink, for this is my blood of the new covenant, which I give for the world." And he said, "Drink this in remembrance of me," and all the whatever it was said, in the King James version. I don't have a Bible in front of me, but I know the gist of it and the general tenor of what was said. And then again, we repeated the same thing, except this time it was with the grape juice. And the one thing I missed, that with all these little shot glasses full of grape juice, there would always be one great big glass, 16 ouncer in the middle, and that was filled to the brim with grape juice. And I don't know why, but maybe for aesthetics. I have no idea. But you had all these little shot glasses around the big glass, and because the trays were a little bit more awkward with the drinks, the deacons, they managed to somehow move down the aisle, the rows, and gave the cups to each, because they didn't want somebody dropping a tray or something. So once, every so often, somebody who was feeling particularly holy that night would always grab the center glass, the big one, and drink the whole darn thing down. I guess they were more consecrated than the rest by doing so. I don't know. It just, the whole thing is so silly, and I don't know. I just, this is what I grew up with, and they gave the same thing. It was a silence. Everything was dead silence, and everybody would drink the juice up. Some would sip a little at a time. Others took the whole thing all at once, and they were all given time to contemplate or to reflect or to pray or whatever it was they were doing when they bowed their heads and looking all sanctimonious. And then the elder who had given the talk, he would get up, and that was the signal. Then everything was unspoken. It was just this timing thing. The elder got up, and then the deacons would collect all the glasses, the empty glasses, and put them back on the tray. Everybody put them on the tray, and they collected the empty glasses and then put them back down on the table. And then the last thing the elder said was, and they sung a hymn and went to the Mount of Olives. And so there was a pre-selected hymn. All the brethren would sing that hymn, and then right on cue, there wasn't a prayer or anything, because I guess at the end of the Matthew account there was no prayer given. It just says, and when they were finished, they went off to the Mount of Olives, and so that's how they practiced it. They would get up and leave. It was as soon as the hymn was done. Usually, they closed the meeting with a prayer, and then everybody would get up and they start chatting, and they would talk, in a regular meeting. But on the memorial night, it was like a funeral. It was silent, dark, and quiet, and nobody talked. Everybody moved with slow movements and acted holy, had these serious looks on their faces and the holy look, and they would go grab their coats and walk out, and that was it. Nobody talked. If there was talking, if somebody bumped into someone and say, "Excuse me," they did it in a whisper. Then nobody talked in a normal voice. And then when the last person left, then about 5 or 10 minutes would go by, and then Grandma would start putting things away, the fold-out chairs, and and us kids, we would help her, put the chairs in the closet, and we would help her, take the table down and put the cups over by the sink and wash the cups, and there was always crackers left over. She always bought way more than what was needed, and I would always take a matzah, but I could never understand why anybody would want matzah, because it was like taking cardboard and chewing cardboard. If you held it in your mouth long enough, it would, the enzymes in your mouth would convert the starches into sugar, and it would begin to have a slight sweet flavor inside, but your mouth. But I could never understand why anybody would want a matzah. And certainly I could understand why you'd want to drink something after eating a matzah because it's so dry. But that was our memorial. And then, inevitably, Grandma would always have bought way more grape juice than she needed, and that was next morning's breakfast juice. We were now allowed to drink this. It wasn't sanctified any longer. It was now normal grape juice. It wasn't holy grape juice. So we would us kids would finish off the grape juice over the next couple days. But that was the memorial, and that's kind of the way the memorial was celebrated by Bible students in New York and other places that I had been to. When we say celebrate the memorial, it certainly wasn't. It was anything but a celebration. It was very solemn, very morbidly quiet, very serious. People didn't talk. It was very weird. It certainly had. If you watched it, if it was something that was filmed, it would very much look like a cult. It really had that feel of a cult. People automatically getting up and doing things because they had done it for years and years, and it was a repetition of something that they knew and did. Nobody said a word, and everything was on cue. Just it was, and they always read the same scripture about. From Matthew about the taking the bread and then taking of the wine, and it was always the same. The elders sometimes would mix up the talks a little bit and talk a little different aspect of what the high calling was and the hope of the future and what our consecration to the high calling meant and all that. Now I don't know what it would be like at a Jehovah's Witness memorial, and I also don't know if they've been giving invitations out like arbitrarily to my daughter, and furthermore, they were handwritten invitations. Now, the invitation slip itself was a pre-printed slip from the Watchtower, but the letter was a full single-page letter, handwritten, that explained the memorial, and it was written in script. And I understand, that schools don't teach script any longer. So somebody was very busy. That's a lot of work. We have 24,000 people in our town now. We're spread out over 82 square miles, so it's a large township. But I don't know how many people they've sent invitations to. In the 20 years I've been here, and close to, I guess we're 19 years here. We're going on 19 years. We've never received an invitation, and I only recall maybe one occasion that Jehovah's Witnesses coming to the door. So I don't know why they would get an invitation and we didn't, and how it's done. But Anyway, if I've seen the Kingdom Halls and they're limited in space, and I assume, like any good religion, there would always be those that who don't attend during the year on a normal basis, but won't miss memorial, like the Catholics. Going to Christmas Mass, not going to any other church, but going to Christmas and Easter. Those were the two important. I had so many friends in high school that they never went to church, they never went to Mass, but they never missed the Christmas Mass and they never missed the Easter Mass. So that was that was. I'm sure that there are Watchtower Jehovah's Witnesses like that who don't show up during the year except for memorial. And if you had a good number of those invitees come, where are they going to stand? I mean, the fire codes only allow so many people in a room, so who knows? I don't. It's not my problem. It's just a little bit of a curious thing. In one way, I'm tempted to see what it's like, and in another way, I just wouldn't go to a Kingdom Hall for the life of me. But I don't know if they take the celebration of the memorial in the same way as I described. But I know that the Bible students from whom the Jehovah's Witnesses derived celebrated the memorial the same way, pretty much everywhere in the same way as I described. It was a very, very solemn, quiet, and strange occasion. And, it was, at the same time, they called it the memorial season. And conventions, there would always be memorial conventions to get you in the spirit of the memorial season. So some classes were noted for 2-3 day long conventions in advance of the memorial, and they'd call them the pre-memorial conventions. There were a number of classes like that. Detroit, the Detroit Bible Students Ecclesia had actually the largest pre-memorial convention on the eastern side of the country, and they were an ecclesia of 230 or so members. So their convention was pretty big. I mean, they'd get 500-600 people at their convention, which for a Bible student convention was pretty big. I'd been to their pre-memorial convention a couple of times. My father would speak there. My father was a pretty high-profile elder in the Bible students movement, especially later on in the 80s when he ended up heading up the Dawn. He was the managing editor of the Dawn, and so. But anyway, I don't want to go on too much longer. I know this is more than a 5-minute soundbite, but just recalling things as they were when I was a kid, and I'm darn glad now that I don't have to go. Sunday's my own. My life is my own, and I'm 63 in a couple more weeks, and I'll I don't know, I can't. I had a heart attack a year and a half ago. I don't know how much time I've got, and I'm gonna enjoy it to the most that I can. So Anyway, I want to say again, thanks to my new subscribers and to all my subscribers, and for putting up with me, and just hope that everything goes well for you all. So take care. Bye bye.